Welcome to the Captain's Table, The Lost Logs. Let's take a look at the sequel campaign to Last Voyage of the Rutan, which was Star Trek Quantum Anomalies. And the very silly title there was intentional. I was not taking it as seriously as I originally had. And I think maybe this was a sign that I should have given Star Trek a little bit of a break, tried something else for a while. The reason we had a whole new series start up was in large part due to the fact that I was sort of imitating what I'd seen my first Star Trek GM do, which was when he got bored of the little old Miranda class that he'd given us. He set up an episode where he basically wrecked the Miranda and gave us a shiny new Intrepid class instead. And I sort of had it in my head that this was how things should be, that I should run my little Oberth science class ship for a while, and then when the players were ready, they would upgrade to something big and shiny and fancy. I think I sort of got this in my head in the same way that you level up in Dungeons & Dragons and many other role-playing games, and there wasn't a very clear leveling up mechanism in the Last Unicorn version of the Star Trek rules, as in most Star Trek rules, because leveling up doesn't really make much practical sense in Star Trek. But a change to a bigger, better ship, that feels similar, right? Your characters are getting new abilities and becoming more dangerous by getting the new ship instead of getting levels. So I think probably that was the logic behind it. And the new ship they got was the USS Singularity, a big, impressive Nebula-class ship. And that really changed the tone of the whole game. Whereas before it was a little tiny ship with a very small crew, and the players and most of their NPC support crew, they were familiar with each other, and they knew each other by name, and it was all comfortable in a way. Now suddenly they're on a ship with hundreds of crew, and they don't know anybody, and they barely even know their own ship. Right? The little tiny Oberth class, I found some very nice deck plans for the interior of it from a site called Cold North. Cold North has a lot of good deck plans for things. Not canon, but useful and believable. And I couldn't find any equivalent for the Nebula class. So again, the players were just very unfamiliar with their own ship, which kind of made sense in a way. It was a new ship, but there wasn't really any way that they could become familiar with it. I also got it into my head to do a more sandboxy kind of a campaign. I had spent a lot of time apparently playing Fallout and Fallout 2, and those are very open world kind of games where you can pretty much go where you like. And I thought a role-playing campaign in the same style would be fantastic. And I have had success with that format since then, but I really wasn't experienced enough back then to make it work well. The first 4 episodes went pretty smoothly. I decided that for a sort of a shakedown cruise of this brand new Singularity, the initial mission would be something that I would call the home run. Right? And this maybe is something you want to borrow for your own campaigns if your players are supposed to be starting with a brand new ship. The idea of the home run is that it's a patrol of the 4 home worlds of the 4 founding species of the Federation, starting from Earth, where the ship was launched, to Vulcan, to I think Andoria, and then Tellar Prime. Possibly the last 2 in the opposite order, but 4 of them. And just episodic little mini adventures for each of those steps. And that was fine, it worked fine. It was not too different from the format we'd previously had. Then I had this really complicated idea of having them sent out to follow the whale probe from Star Trek 4 that had presumably been followed by Starfleet for decades since the 2280s. And something happens with this huge whale probe, and it just disappears off into space, and the USS Singularity is sent to go and investigate. And when they investigate, they find a device of some sort. I made it sort of kind of related to a device that they had found aboard the USS Rutan way back in the Styx Rift, although that connection was very tenuous and not very well explained even in my own mind. But yeah, the point of this device was that it was a faster than light propulsion thing that would basically throw them out of the galaxy to a cluster that would normally be out of reach of most Starfleet ships. And then they would be free to explore this cluster, kind of, I think, in a similar sort of way that we had done with the Styx Rift initially. But with the Styx Rift, I had an episode set up for each location. The idea was just go out into space and do whatever you like. Much more open world setup. I think I'd had random encounter tables set up for it as well, and it just wasn't very good. I think it was too comfortable for them in their initial starting point. The first, star that they reached was a place where they could have adventures, and the threat level was relatively low, so they could do stuff. The players were engaged without having to go exploring further afield. I think I'd sort of roughly modelled this on The Wizard of Oz, the idea that they were off to see the wizard, and that was supposed to be their ticket for getting back to Federation space. But I don't think I conveyed that to the players very well. I don't think they really knew what they were aiming for, what the point of their campaign was. And so they just mulled around a little bit very vaguely for half a dozen sessions. So yeah, I mapped out this cluster that they were exploring, and they never really got to see most of it. So yeah, it was not a great success. It fizzled out. I barely remember anything at all. I've got my written notes of what was supposed to happen in each episode or at each location. I've got names of NPCs and all sorts of things, but I still can't really actually remember what the plot was, what actually occurred in most sessions. And then my university studies got more and more pressing, and I just sort of had to stop running the game. And we only briefly got back together again for the last Voyage of the Rutan reunion LARP that I mentioned in the other video. But other than that, that's pretty much the end of my GMing for most of that group. Occasionally we got together, somebody else would run something. I believe at one point part of that group reassembled for a couple other campaigns, but never really the same thing again. And that was, I think, the last Star Trek role-playing I GM'd for years. So mid-2006 until, when was it? About 2011. So yeah, I think the failure of quantum singularities, quantum anomalies, kind of shook my confidence a bit. And I think other players that I was involved with, they also lost confidence in me a bit, and it took a while for them to get interested or willing to try my games again. I will say that the open world setting, the sandbox campaign, if that's what you want to call it, works very well with Star Trek. I have since done it well. But it takes a lot more preparation than I'd initially given it. And I say this as an advocate of improvised GMing. You can't just have a rough idea of what's going to happen there and then very specific ideas of what the adventure should be. You have to kind of do it the other way around. This is what worked for me later on, and I'll explain this more in a later video. But you want to have a very good idea of what the setting is, who is there, what their motives are. Motives are especially important. what the conflicts are between the different parts of your setting. Um, and then when you let the players run free through it, you don't have to have particular adventures set up in mind for them. You can just say, you go to a place, what are you going to do there? They want to do something, well, now they start bumping into your setting, and things will ensue, because you know what will go wrong for them, or what can go wrong for them there, and who can help them, and who will want to hinder them, and who will not actively be trying to harm them, but will get in their way anyway, because you've planned the world, and now they're just rolling around in it. That's not what I did with Quantum Anomalies. Quantum Anomalies, I had, I think, a lot of ideas that I was basically just copying from Fallout. And I thought it would play out pretty much the same as Fallout. But of course, my experience of Fallout, because it's an open world game, would not be the same as everybody else's. Other people with their own characters would have played that game off in different directions with different motives. And so even experiencing the same content I did in that game would have understood it in different ways, because they arrived in it in different ways. So clearly a bad starting point for me to build my model of this campaign from. And I think I was also just too busy with university studies. I didn't have as much time that year to plot out detailed adventures every week for the players. And it showed. Eventually, I couldn't run it for them as well as before. So yeah, that did eventually just, it fizzled out. Officially, we took a break part of the way through, and called that season 1, and then started up again with another couple episodes of season 2, but season 2 didn't last. Yeah, it was an interesting concept for a campaign. I've still got a lot of the notes for it. I might even one day expand on them and build them up, and maybe somebody can go rescue the USS Singularity, because officially the USS Singularity never got back to the Federation. They're still out there somewhere. Yeah, maybe some future campaign can go rescue them or something like that. But I'm not in a big rush to do that. That's maybe a few years down the line from now. But you know, it was again a learning experience. I made plenty of mistakes to learn from.